Easily we can tell the difference between a fake smile and a real smile. Can't we? Even on the Biebs. Justin Bieber is the most famous person from
That's Justin Bieber.
Canada. Yeah. It's when he was a baby. When he was a baby. Before he got like tattooed everywhere on his face. Oh, God. Always good to see you, Joe. So how can you tell the difference between a real smile and a fake smile? You can look at their eyes. If somebody's really smiling, they crinkle up their eyes. As interesting as that is. And this is universal. His mouth is open more. Of course, the Biebs, when he has a fake smile.
That's actually the smile that he gives when he's roaming around with Haley Baldwin.
What, the fake smile?
Yes.
Oh, that's not good. That's not good. Well, he is Canadian. And for most Canadians, not being in Canada is a happier time. And the reason is because it's so damn cold up there in the wintertime. And the sun doesn't shine very much, so it makes them not smile. It's really kind of interesting. I used to live in Montana, right up near the Canadian border, and we'd get like 5 hours of sunshine in the wintertime, right around Christmas. 5 hours. 5 hours. But then in the summertime, by golly, sun went down at like 11 o'clock. Oh. And then came up again at 3 or 4. Oh, it's terrible. Anyway, okay, voluntarily produced facial expressions like a wink and a false smile suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays, and that's the fake smile that we're looking at right here. Yesterday, big deal, big, huge deal. It seems like the Saudi Crown Prince, the guy that's going to be king, who will be king, potentially, had something to do with not only the murder of a newsman, not only his murder, but then they chopped him up into little pieces to transport him out of the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. Okay, so why is this important? Because yesterday, Pompeo, who is our Secretary of State, went to Saudi Arabia and talked with the Crown Prince. And lots of smiles, big smiles. Big smiles. Big smiles. Big smiles. Okay, everybody's smiling. Does that mean they're happy? No, that means they're probably not. I know, we got a problem. So we're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Saudi Arabia is one of our major allies in the Middle East. Middle East is really important because, hey, geez, we've been fighting in Iraq for how many years? Since 2003. We're still not finished. Syria we're still not done with Syria, so something's got to give. The other thing we know about these Saudi Arabians is that 12 out of the 14 terrorists that perpetrated the terrorist attack on 9/11 were Saudi Arabian. Damn it. And who's the one that financed the whole thing? Well, it was Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden, guess what country he comes from? And guess how rich his family is? Village. He's Saudi Arabian again. Okay, so this really interesting conversations last night on the news. For some reason, I watched the news all night, and they just kept showing Pompeo and what is it, MBS or whatever his name is, the Crown Prince, smiling at each other. Big smiles, just like the ones on the right. So the question is, what are we going to do about Saudi Arabia? And the answer is, well, if they executed a newspaper man, then maybe we shouldn't be their allies anymore. We'll see what happens. Well, I just keep saying that, don't I?
Where was the newspaper man?
From here, he's Washington Post.
Wow.
But he was a Saudi Arabian citizen. He wasn't an American citizen, but he worked for the Washington Post. He had applied for American citizenship. And he was covering the Saudi Arabian beat, which is a beat that you need to cover, obviously. Anyway, yeah, kind of cool. We'll see what happens. No, he's dead. Not just dead. They didn't just kill him, they chopped him up to transport his body out of the embassy. I know, it seems like a little bit of overkill. Seems like a lot of overkill. There was a guy there that said that he could do a autopsy in 7 minutes. Of course, none of you have ever done an autopsy. I'm the only one that's ever done one. But 7 minutes is really, really fast, okay? Sometimes it takes you 7 minutes just to open the guy up. And here, he gets the whole thing done. Of course, you have to pull out all the organs. You have to weigh them to make sure that that's what is going on in an autopsy. You're trying to figure out what's wrong with the guy. So you're pulling out all of his organs, and sometimes you can take the brain out. He can do it in 7 minutes.
Wait, so they already did an autopsy on him?
No, well they dismembered this guy. They chopped him into little pieces. But it was the guy that bragged about being able to do an autopsy for 7 minutes that was chopping him up. I know, he knows just where to cut. I don't know.
He's done it before.
He's done it before. And now, and of course there's no body because they've done something with the body. They probably incinerated it. So, no corpus delicti. It's got to be a body. That's what corpus delicti is. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our face reflect our true feelings. Okay, so the question is, can we put an expression on our face to force us to have different emotions? That's what Strack Martin and Strepper did in 1988. They sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or a smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. They were watching Laurel and Hardy. That's what they were watching. These are German guys. One group held the pencil in their lips, and the other group held the pencil in their teeth with their mouths open, forcing this group to smile and forcing this group to frown. Now the interesting thing was, afterwards they asked them to rate the comedy as to how funny it was. And the group that were forced to smile thought it was a funnier movie than the people that were forced to frown. So you can change your emotions just by changing the expression on your face. So when I was at Ashford, I decided, well, we'll just duplicate this damn thing. I took a whole group of students, and we did the same thing. And they wrote down from time to time whether they thought it was funny or not. What did we watch? The one about the kids the babies in diapers, and they interact. What was that strange cartoon? Rugrats. That's what it was. It was Rugrats, yeah. Which I didn't think was funny at all. But as far as my research was concerned, both groups didn't think that it was funny. Now the stupid thing is, I asked them to choose what show they're going to watch. And they voted on Rugrats. And then they didn't think it was funny. So why in the world watch a show that you don't think is funny, even though you're supposed to buy it? Anyway, it was kind of goofy. Matsumoto, Kudo, Shear, and Walbot in 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling these emotions longer and more intensely than the Japanese. But we're going to talk about the Japanese and emotions in just a second. What is this the symbol of? Oh, please.
The Green Lantern.
The Green Lantern, of course. What is that the symbol of? Is it? I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's probably the X-Men. I see this on Sheldon's shirts from time to time. It took me forever to figure out what that Green Lantern was. Green Lantern. Anyway, so they're looking at Japanese and American students, and they're trying to determine which one shows more emotion than the other, or do they show the same emotion? Mosqueda and Karasawa in 2002 had Japanese and American students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions that they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than Americans. So we're just flip-flopping from one emotion to the other. The Japanese, they don't have hardly any emotions at all. And I've been in Japan and I've watched people's faces, and a lot of times they don't show any emotion at all. Remember I told you the story about the Japanese stewardesses. So some of you remember the story. I'm not going to tell you the Japanese stewardess story again. Okay. I'll tell you a little piece of it. I was on a monorail, and we were going from the airplane to the terminal, and it was about a mile and a half. It took us about, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes to get from one place to the other. And I got on the monorail first, and then the stewardesses got on. And in Japan, you don't ever, somebody doesn't sit in one corner and then somebody sits in the other corner. What happens in Japan, they all just pack in. And that's what happened, they all packed in. So here I am, I'm standing there, kind of in the corner, not quite in the corner, and I've got Japanese stewardesses all around me. Which makes me smile, but I'm an American. So here's these Japanese stewardesses, and they're all standing around me, and then the monorail starts. Well, I don't know if you've ever been on a monorail, but it kind of rocks from side to side, kind of bounces up and down a little bit. So here I've got all these women pressed up against me, and it was almost like a standing lap dance, except there was no lap. It was really kind of weird. It was just kind of strange. Now the odd thing was, here I've got all these women rubbing up against me. Of course, I'm trying to be as small as I possibly can, which isn't hard for me because I'm not a very big person. But here they've got no expression on their faces at all. They're just rubbing their bodies all over me, and I know it's there. I can feel it. But they had no expression whatsoever, as odd as that may seem. There was something else about it. It had to do with pheromones. It's not, that's a different story. That's a different part of the story. Okay. Very, very odd experience. One that I had never experienced before. I mean, normally if you, well, let's take sitting at the airport. You sit down at the airport, and does somebody sit down beside you? Most people put stuff in their, they put stuff on both sides of them so nobody will sit close to them, right? Isn't that the way it works? Not in Japan. They'll just pick your shit up and throw it on the floor and sit right down beside you, because there's not enough room in Japan. There's just, it's really crowded there. So they're used to all this, people pressing up against each other.
Here's an example, Bruce.
What?
Kidding.
There you go. Poor Sharon. I guess she's not showing up today. She kept writing me emails. I kept telling her things. I guess I made her feel bad. Mockellums, Blaskovich, and McCall in 2012, and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. We always know how we feel. We're always thinking about how we feel. But East Asians don't. They don't pay attention to it. Remember, I keep telling you that they live up here. They don't live here. They live up here. And they can do that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they can stand beside somebody in a subway and not get self-conscious. They're not going to get self-conscious because they live up here, not in with their body. So they can actually meditate or remove themselves from the situation and they don't even think anything about it. So that's the way East Asians do things as compared to Westerners. We're always aware of our surroundings. We always know what's going on because we're Westerners. Zakoda in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. So we may be the people that pay attention to our emotions more than anybody else. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. And of course, that makes sense. I mean, it's very logical. If they're not paying attention to their emotions, probably they won't be able to acknowledge their emotions as readily as we do. And potentially, of course, their emotions are less intense than Americans. I have no idea what she's showing that guy. He doesn't want to see it. But this can be a problem. Here lately, they upped my blood pressure medicine, and they doubled it. So I've been tired. At night, I just go home and crash. I'm just so tired. But they gave me an extra amount of blood pressure medicine, twice as much as I had before. As a Westerner, of course, I react to things. Of course I do, because I'm a Westerner. If I were Asian, potentially I wouldn't need any blood pressure medicine because I wouldn't react to things nearly as readily as I do because I'm a Westerner. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. I'm not hostile, I just have high blood pressure. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. So they hold it in, and that causes that degree of holding your anger in is what causes you to have a heart attack. And I told you when I had my heart attack, I had my heart attack after I got fired. And I was pretty upset. I was upset for a couple different reasons. One of the reasons was because they had me teach summer school. Nobody else would teach summer school, so I taught summer school. What a nice guy I am. I taught summer school. And then the day after I finished teaching summer school, they fired me. Bastards. Isn't that the most cold-hearted thing that you could possibly imagine? And they got everything they could out of me, and then they fired me. Well, of course I'm going to be a little upset. More than a little upset. And of course, it was 8 days later that I had my heart attack. Okay, so we're going to do studies up in Canada. In cultures where anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. But why are Chinese Canadians so important? Well, they represent about 15% of the population. That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. 50% of the population of Canada is Chinese, or of Chinese ancestry. The funny thing is, and this isn't that humorous, you can see this as funny if you want, but the interesting thing is that if you look at Canada 50 years ago, the percentage of Chinese people they had in the country was almost non-existent. They had the same rules in Canada that we had in the United States. They wouldn't allow immigration from Asia. Look at there, Joe's laughing. He thinks it's funny. We were afraid that the Chinese were going to invade our country. This whole immigration fear that we have in the United States. So in the 1880s, we blocked all immigration coming in from Asia. We were really trying to keep the Chinese out, but what we ended up doing was keeping everybody out, anybody that was Asian. So it really pissed the Japanese off. Really pissed the Japanese off, to the extent that they were upset about that for like 40 or 50 years, and then they bombed Pearl Harbor. Then they attacked us, and of course, one of the reasons that they gave for it was the fact that we had been excluding them from immigrating to the United States for decades. course, they were upset about that. Anyway, okay, so all of a sudden, so there's no Chinese in Canada, and then all of a sudden, when Hong Kong went to China, Hong Kong used to be a British protectorate. In 2000, a lot of the Chinese from Hong Kong immigrated to Seattle and Vancouver. They immigrated to Western Canada. So there's a lot. It's like 15% of the population all of a sudden, and there's some Canadians that really don't like it at all. They're really upset about it. But hey, they had a lot of money. I mean, usually they couldn't immigrate unless they had some bucks. So it's the rich Chinese that immigrated to Canada. Given potentially anger-inducing scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found the scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. So giving them the same scenario, the Chinese didn't find it nearly as aggravating as the European Canadians did. The most common reaction by the European Canadians from the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. We're taught that. And it's a good thing, because if you suppress your anger, you're going to have a heart attack. So you have to be very, very careful. I got fired and I didn't punch anybody. If I had punched somebody, maybe I wouldn't have had a heart attack. I know, I should. Maybe I should go up there. No, the lady that fired me is now at AHEC. She's really important at AHEC. So I gotta keep my temper. I won't tell you who she is. But she, no, I don't know if I should play that. She did witchy things, and I know somebody told me, oh, she's doing these strange things, and something's going to happen, and something did happen. 8 days later, I had a heart attack.
Whoa.
I know. But up there, when somebody does something bad, they get it back twofold. So there were some things that happened to her also. I know. Okay. I didn't die, and which was bad for her. No, she told me that if I ever tried to work in Indian country again, she'd make sure I didn't get the job. I know, I got the job. Hey, I've been here for 3 years. Guess she doesn't have the power she thought she did. She came down with cancer. Much rather have a heart attack. You know, you fix it, it's over with. Cancer, man, that's something that just stays with you for like the rest of your life. So we'll see what happens, how long she lasts. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way, or to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event. In other words, we as Americans, we focus on this. This is pissing us off. So we're going to focus on this. But if I were Chinese, I would pretend that it's not happening. I would try to focus on something else. So if we're dealing with Asia, with somebody from Asia potentially, and something really upsets them, they won't focus on it. They'll focus on something else. They'll try to talk about something else. And that's what happened during World War II. The Japanese were really upset with us. And we were really upset with the Japanese, and we kept telling them, you need to stop attacking the Chinese. They butchered people in the streets in Nanking. They were doing all this horrible stuff, and we kept shaking our fingers at them and telling them to stop. And they kept talking about trade policies, and they kept talking about the fact that we wouldn't trade oil, that we wouldn't give them any steel. So they're talking about all these things that don't have a whole lot to do with anything, and we're talking about all of the military things that they're doing. We're focusing on what we see as the problem, and they're focusing on something else. But that's the way Asians do things. If it really upsets them, they talk about something else. So this is really important. This is really important because it wasn't, what was it, 3 months ago that Trump talked to the premier of North Korea. Remember what happened? He'd been insulting this guy he'd been insulting him for months, and then all of a sudden they get together, and he says, "Well, he was the nicest guy in the world." Sure, he was the nicest guy in the world. What is he thinking about, though? Is he thinking about all the negative things you said about him? No, he's distracting himself by talking about other things. That's what was going on. Now, can you trust him? Well, yeah, you can trust him, but you have to understand what he's talking about. He's not. If something really bothers him, he doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to talk about something else, and that's what he did with Trump. So Trump thinks that everything's fine because he wasn't angry about this and he wasn't angry about that. But they didn't talk about these things. They talked about something else. Does all that make sense? Ouch. Okay, so we've got a president that doesn't understand what's going on as far as the Asians are concerned. But we have diplomats that understand all this stuff. Where were they? Well, they weren't there. It was Trump and Un. It's fascinating, isn't it? So we're going to, I know. So Trump thinks that Un is going to stop building nuclear weapons and that he's going to stop his missile program. He thinks that that's what's going to happen. But of course, that may not be what's going to happen because he's Asian. And Asians don't talk about what they're focusing on. They try to distract, they try to think about something else. They try to distract themselves. It's not like they're trying to lie to you, they're just trying to distract themselves. If you've ever watched a Japanese samurai movie, they're always just kind of standing there, and then all of a sudden they draw their sword and chop people into a hamburger, and then they put their sword back. Then they put their sword back. They're distracting themselves. They're trying not to get too emotional. So somebody's yelling at them, and they're kind of ignoring them, and then all of a sudden they draw their sword, take care of the situation, put the sword back, and then they're not unhappy again. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response, and thus they felt less angry. So they control anger by distracting themselves, by thinking about something else. And it keeps them from having heart attacks. The only way that we can not have heart attacks is by expressing our anger. But of course it doesn't work nearly as well because the emotion is still there, and the emotion does whatever damage that the emotion does.
So it's not just their diet that makes them live longer, it's the way they handle anger.
It is.
Stress.
It is. They don't have the heart attacks that we have. They smoke a lot. When they smoke, they'll draw the tobacco, the smoke into their mouths, and then they'll swallow it. So they don't have lung cancer like we have. They have stomach cancer. I know, it's weird. The only time the Japanese or the Chinese or Asians, the only time Asians will express any emotions is when they're drunk. And they get drunk really, really fast. And the reason is because they don't have the same enzymes in their stomach that European Americans have, that Europeans have. They don't have the alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomach. So when they break down alcohol, it goes right to their faces. So they'll drink a can of beer and their cheeks will just turn rosy red. It's funny. It's really. It's not that funny. I think it's funny. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressure of their Canadian participants. Both Chinese Canadian and European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than European Canadians. Remember, these people are distracting themselves. So their blood pressure would return to normal faster. If we try to swallow our anger, if we try to do something with the anger, we're still thinking about what we're angry about. And of course, we will be aggravated by it for a longer period of time. And that's when we have our heart attacks. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than the European Canadians and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from physiological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. It's the only way that we could dissipate our anger was by expressing it. If we were better at meditation, don't talk to Don Robinson about this. He'll tell you to meditate. You go curl up in the corner and meditate. That's the way he does it. And he'll probably live forever. I don't know, he's losing his hair. Have you noticed? His hair's a lot thinner than it was. I think that's why he's growing the beard, because he's losing the hair on his head. And you can tell him I said that too. See if it makes him angry. Let's see what...
I guess meditation's not working.
It's evidently something's not working. Or maybe he's meditating to lose his hair. I don't know. Maybe not. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions as it is for us. They practice all their life. And of course, if we learn to do it, it takes a while. It not only takes a while, but usually by the time we figure it out, we're already dead. Or whatever. Okay, let's talk about language. This is my favorite picture. I want eyebrows just like that. Well, there's Halloween. There you go. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. 2,000 different emotion words. What the hell's wrong with it? English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions. Not every language is like that. The Chewang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represent Ekman's basic emotions: anger, shame, and fear. They only have 8 words, so they're less likely to react emotionally to things. How about that? This isn't fair. Wait, some of these guys don't even have words for emotions. Luganda speakers from Uganda do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. So when they're grieving, are they angry or are they just sad? The Gidjingali Aborigines of Australia use one word, Guru Kaj, to express both shame and fear. That's the Aborigines of Australia. Samoans use one word, alofa, to express both love and pity. Love and pity. That's interesting. Wait a minute, it gets better. There we go. There she is. The Utku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude. The Utku. We saw an Utku earlier. She had a tattooed chin. This lady. Oh, she has the same tattoos on her chin. Utku. The Ifalok of Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. So they you can't even tell the difference between anger and happy and sad. None of these emotions. They don't have words for any of these emotions. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude. Feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. Schadenfreude. Wait a minute, let's think about this for a second. Schadenfreude. Feeling good because somebody else is having a bad time. Have you ever seen a homeless guy on the street and it made you happy?
I'm happy that I wasn't like
I guess. Did you?
That's hard, not maybe make them happy because they weren't in that person's shoes. Maybe that's what they're talking about.
It's more extreme than that. Remember the German concentration camps where they're starving people and torturing them to death? That made them feel good.
Probably made them feel like they had power.
See, you're thinking like like an American. It wasn't a position of power. It was. I don't have to suffer like this, so this makes me feel good. I feel good because I'm not suffering. The concentration camps are making more and more sense all the time, just because of that word right there, Schadenfreude. This is weird. We don't have this emotion. Do we ever feel good because other people are not as rich as we are? German Americans have lost this a long time ago. So, I mean, the vast majority of people in the United States, the number one ethnic group in the United States are Germans. Not English, but Germans. More Germans came over, immigrated to the United States than from any other country. So we have a lot of Germans in the United States. But I don't know anybody that practices Schadenfreude.
Is Schultz German?
Schultz, yeah.
Is that why that's on there?
Oh, he's, no, that's just Charlie Brown. He was from Minnesota, okay? He was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He drew his cartoons up north, up there with them crazy Canadian guys, eh? Things are starting to make sense, aren't they? I mean, it took us forever to figure out what the hell was going on. Why did they want to exterminate all the Jews? What's wrong with Jewish people? And of course, nobody has an answer. What's wrong with Jewish people? Well, it's hard for us to understand how the Germans are feeling. Because the Jewish people actually had some money. They were in business, and so they had money. And then when they took all their money away, they made people feel good because they took the money away. They had Schadenfreude. So these people that were on top were now underneath them. They didn't feel really, really good. They had this idea that there was this Jewish conspiracy all over the world, and that they were controlling all the money in the world. And they were going to cure the world of that problem. This is weird. We don't have this emotion. Oh, I don't think we do. So there are some, if you're a German, it's easy to hate other people because you get positive feelings from something negative happening to those individuals. I can't think of any group in the United States that has those same feelings. I hope I can. I'm trying not to think of anybody that has those feelings. Okay. These are people from Java. I don't know what he did with his ears. He looks like Mr. Spock. Oh, wait a minute. She's got the same thing on her. Okay. The Javanese have a term, iklas, which refers to a somewhat pleasant feeling caused by frustration. It's like if you're constipated and you can't quite go to the bathroom, you're going, oh man, I feel great. But I don't know if iklas has to do with constipation or not. Okay, the Japanese, ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It's almost like codependence. This is kind of weird. It often involves the tendencies to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. And it's called ame. So one person picks on the other person. One person denigrates the other person. And theoretically, it shows how close they are because they're able to stay together despite the fact that one person is insulting the other or denigrating the other. So some of their relationships in Japan seem almost sadistic. Because one person then totally subordinates themselves to the other person. And this is known as ame. It's usually the woman that is subordinating herself to the man. So she follows behind him. She does whatever he wants her to do. She's at his beck and call. Sounds like codependence, but it's more than that. He doesn't have anything nice to say about her. He insults her. But he does it to prove his love for her. Oh my God. This is the weirdest stuff in the world. The first Schadenfreude and now ame. Oh my goodness gracious. Does this exist here? When I first got here, people said, yeah, I see that all the time. On the reservation. Ame. Where the two people their relationship is solid, but one of the people in the relationship is mean to the other person. This is a picture of Ame. She is using him to wash her feet. She's standing on him to wash her feet. I think that's a she. I don't know. He's got short, yeah, she's got. I typed Ame into the Google picture search, and this is what came up. Really kind of bizarre. She's using him to prop herself up. I don't know what's going on here. I don't think it's anything sexual. Let's pretend it has something to do with them bathing or something. Does that exist here? Have you ever seen this? One person is, no? Okay. One person allows themselves to be so subordinate to the other individual, and that shows their love for that individual. And the other person not abuses, that's really the wrong word, but isn't nice to them, and that shows their love for the other person by allowing them to be subordinate. Oh, jeez. I don't know. Uchida, Townsend, Marcus, and Bergseeker compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences led them to connect with others, or leads them to, well, it's not the right word. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotions, experiences, the emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. So Americans are looking for, the Japanese want to be like everybody else. They want emotional experiences that are similar to everybody else. Americans want emotional experiences that are different from other people. Okay. In 2013, Oishi, Graham, Kesabir, and Gallen Ha examined dictionaries for the definition of happiness in 30 different countries. They found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. Okay, so what does luck have to do with happiness? Okay, everybody gets a lottery ticket. One of you guys is going to win and make $1 million. Is that happy? Will you be happy after you make your $1 million? Really? What does luck have to do with happiness? And if you're going to feel happy because you were lucky, then you agree with 24 other countries, because that happiness and luck is part of the definition of happiness. As strange as that is. Except in 3 Spanish-speaking countries, Spain, Argentina, and Ecuador, the United States, India, and Kenya are the only places where luck didn't have anything to do with happiness. What does luck have to do with happiness? If you win, what is that thing where they pay you $1,000 a week for life? Publishers Clearinghouse. And when somebody wins in Publishers Clearinghouse, that they ever stand there and go, oh, okay, thanks. Well, if they do, they don't show them on television. How do you win in Publishers Clearinghouse? Nobody knows. It just happens. I guess it's luck. So is that happiness? Should that be happiness? If you're lucky? Not in the United States. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as important, an important part of the definition. So in the United States, we feel happier than people that think that luck is part of happiness. Marrying the right person. Doesn't marrying the right person, isn't that lucky? No, it's not lucky. But it makes you happy, right? I'm telling. Doesn't marrying the right person make you happy?
Yes.
Isn't that really the definition of happiness? Marrying the right person? Being around somebody that makes you feel good? Okay. I'm not telling, I'm just kidding. She's coming in to inspect my house tomorrow. So. Looking at definitions across time in the United States dictionary, in U.S. dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. What happened in 1961? Well, what happened in 1961, Kennedy became president. The Russians were the first people in space. Breakfast at Tiffany's, Elvis Presley was very popular at the time. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But all of a sudden, we took luck out of the whole idea of happiness in our dictionary in the United States. Dictionaries from every country are cultural. So they represent the culture of that country. So who are the happiest people in the world? As it turns out, people from Scandinavia are the happiest people in the world. We're going to talk about Scandinavia and the Nordic countries. The problem is, and I looked this up, I couldn't figure out what's the difference between Scandinavia and the Nordic countries. Well, as it turns out, they're synonymous. I know, it's very confusing. So the Scandinavian countries are Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands. Okay, those are the Scandinavian countries. So which ones are Nordic? They are the areas that were controlled by the Norsemen, the Vikings. Well, that includes England, but they're not a Nordic country. I know. Greenland is a Nordic country. It's actually controlled by Denmark. Iceland is controlled by Denmark and Norway. So the happiest places people who feel the highest subjective well-being are people from the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, Latin American countries, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. Those are the people that are the happiest. But as we're going to find, the unhappiest people are the people that used to live in the old Soviet Union. So all those countries, the Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all of those countries. Belarusia, which I keep hearing pronounced in different ways. Anyway, those are the countries that are the least happy. And as you can see, he's making a big muscle because he's so much stronger than everybody else. He's from the Ukraine. That's the Ukrainian flag right there. I don't know where I got that picture. Anyway, so the people from the old Soviet Union, impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia are the least happy people in the world. They did a similar study of regions in the United States and found, here's a shock for you. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? The places in the United States where they are the least happy are the people that live in the Southeast. People who live in South Carolina. The people that just got hit by Michael are the people that are the unhappiest. Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. People in the Southeast are the least happy people in the United States. Now, strangely enough, If we look at populations of African Americans in the United States, the states with the highest populations of African Americans are all in the southeast. South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. So they have that conflict going on between African Americans and European Americans. The happiest place in the United States, congratulations, Mountain West, and New England. People who live in Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Upper New York State. Those are the happiest people in the United States. So that could include you guys. So congratulations, you are the happiest people in the United States. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives. One of the things is wealth. I just gave all you guys $1 million, and you seem pretty happy about it. I don't remember anybody that was crying because you got your $1 million from Publishers Clearinghouse, $1,000 a week for life or something. You know what's going to happen. You get $1,000 a week for life, and they're going to send out an assassin to wipe you out, to shoot you or something. I don't want $1,000. I don't want them knocking on my door and shivving me or something. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. People who are, they get to eat every day. I have a dog that's a stray, and nobody feeds it. But he stopped eating, and I'm afraid something's going on. I think somebody might have poisoned him. It's easy to poison a dog. All you have to do is give them stuff that you put in your radio.
Antifreeze.
Antifreeze will wipe them out right away. You gave
My uncle has a story where outside his shop in Phoenix, a dog was drinking antifreeze and then it killed over not too long after.
Of course, he didn't feed it.
No, it was just sitting out.
It tastes sweet, and that's why they eat it. It tastes like food. But it kills them. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there is no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being. And this is research done by Diener in 1995. Diener is a German word. Does anybody know what it means? Diener? Diener means helper. I know, helper, and helper. In 1995. Remember we were talking about autopsies and the guy that could do one in 7 minutes? Okay. The person that helps the guy do the autopsy, the pathologist do an autopsy, is called a Diener. He's the helper. I know, I just thought that was kind of cool. So I used to do those. I used to be a Diener. not the best smelling job in the world. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive, of course. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met. And of course, that's what we have in the United States. Everybody's needs have been met except that dog that looks like it's starving to death. I gave it 2 bowls of food this afternoon. I went home. My dogs were out. So I went home and I gave it 2 bowls of food and wouldn't eat either one of them. It ate the milk bones off the top, but it wouldn't eat either bowl of food. I know, don't get scared. I know. Those countries that promote human rights the most tend to have the happiest citizens, the ones with human rights. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not as happy. And of course, that's what we're afraid is going on with, that's what we are afraid was going on with Khashoggi. Khashoggi was an opposition leader in Saudi Arabia. It became so dangerous for him there that he immigrated to the United States. And we allowed him in. And then he became a newsman for, he signed on with the Washington Post. And he was over in Turkey investigating something, and that's when he disappeared. But we know what happened to him. He's no longer alive. And they chopped him into little pieces. So this is what we're worried about. He opposed the government, and all of a sudden he ends up dead. Not just dead, tortured and dead. So we're worried that our ally is not a good group of people. So now we're kind of upset. If you knew anything about Saudi Arabia, I just gave you a little piece of information that 12 out of 14 of the terrorists that perpetrated the attack on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, and Osama bin Laden was Saudi Arabian. Should they be our allies? I mean, they seem to want to attack us all the time. Select individuals seem to want to attack us. So what's the problem with breaking off relations with Saudi Arabia? What is the problem? Who's the ambassadors to Saudi Arabia? There is none. It's Jared Kushner. he's not an ambassador. So what would be the problem with breaking off relations with Saudi Arabia? Since we're talking about cultural psychology and I'm talking about politics. Not just politics, but international politics. So what would be the problem with breaking off relations with these guys? What's that stuff you put in your car? Oh yeah, oil. Okay. They are the #1 oil producer in the world. Whoops! So that's the problem with breaking off relations with Saudi Arabia. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how important is oil? Are we going to allow these horrors to continue? Terrorist attacks against the United States, newsmen that are chopped into little pieces. That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And guess what answer we're going to come up with? Oil's always more important. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. That's what's going to happen. The overall equality among people in a country is associated with greater subjective well-being. Saudi Arabia is a democratic country. Are you ready for this? Guess who gets to vote? The royal family. The royal family gets to vote. So if you're a member of the royal family, it's a democracy. If you're not a member of the royal family, which the vast majority of people in Saudi Arabia aren't members of the royal family, they don't get to vote. I know, but it's still a democracy. We talk about it all the time. Here, let's talk about the Scandinavians and Nordic people again. Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences in opportunities among its citizens. Remember, there was this huge influx of immigrants coming in from Africa and the Middle East, and they were going all over Europe. And some countries were letting them in, and some countries were blocking them. The Scandinavian countries didn't take very many immigrants in, and everybody was a bit upset with the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Danes, and whatnot. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened, and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Remember, the Japanese don't experience very strong emotions. They control their emotions. But we as Americans, we don't. We let them fly. We let our emotions go. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week that they were having and then asked them to remember the week. So think back about your week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week accurately. Wait a minute. So as Americans, we keep trying to think positively. We accentuate the positive and try to eliminate the negative. Don't we? Don't we think of all the good stuff that happened to us and try to forget all the bad stuff that happened to us? No? Yes. I guess we do. It keeps you from getting PTSD. It works every time. Follow-up research by Rogers, Ping, Wang, and Howe found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. It's right in the Constitution. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. So they were more accurate with looking back on their week. Except with depressed people. Depressed people, when they look back at their week, all they remember is all the bad stuff. They don't remember the good stuff, if there was any good stuff. But most of us, when we look back, we don't remember the, I don't know, somebody just had a flat tire. One of my students, oh, it was Hope, had a flat tire yesterday. My Miata is running out of gas. I need to go to the gas station and fill up my Miata. My other car's got gas. My Miata, the little bitty thing, it's just that little tiny thing. It's a joy to drive, okay? Here I am, I'm talking about emotions. I drive this car, it's just a damn car. Why in the world should I get such pleasure out of driving a car? Why should I be emotional about driving a car? Because it's a hoot. It's like riding on a skateboard down the hill. I mean, it's great. And I can drive up the hill just like I can drive down the hill. It's great. Anyway, so here I am. I'm having an emotional experience about driving a car. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences in subjective well-being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. So we focus on, our culture tells us whether we're supposed to be happy or sad. Doesn't it? Who was I talking to about the Sioux? Oh, it was Stephanie. She has a friend from Rosebud. Does anybody know any Sioux people? Any of the Sioux guys? They're kind of grouchy. They're just a little grouchy, okay? I mean, some tribes are just the happiest people in the world. They just kind of wander around from joy to joy. And other tribes, they just focus on negative things. Really? How about Cheyennes? Grouchy. Happy? Grouchy. Grouchy people? It's because they live close to the Sioux. They live, the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is right next to the Crow Reservation. Remember the Battle of Little Bighorn? It was the Cheyenne and the Sioux against Custer and the Crow. Wait a minute. Okay. So then they put the reservations right next to each other. These guys who had been blood enemies for ever. So they put the reservations right next to each other. That's Northern Cheyenne. You're probably talking about Southern Cheyenne. In a study by Falk, Dunn, and Narenzian in 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. Wait a minute, this sounds like what you're doing with your kids. Okay, I'll buy you a video game. So what do you buy them? You buy, I don't know, that frog thing. What is it?
Leapfrog?
Leapfrog. Yeah, so you buy a Leapfrog and tell them it's a game. No, they want Halo. What are you doing? Giving them.
You want Fortnite.
They want, exactly. They don't want Leapfrog. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. So they want to play Leapfrog. No wonder they're smarter than Europeans. They play Leapfrog. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. The European Canadians were more likely to choose the courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with the Asian Canadians, who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. I had a student from Bangladesh. I keep talking about my student from Bangladesh. When he first came over here, he was a computer major. And then he changed to a math major. And then he changed to an environmental science major. And finally, after talking to me for a while, he changed his major to psychology. I know, I ruined the kid. Why in the world would he study? He hated computers, but it was more utilitarian. He didn't hate math, he was really good at it, so he didn't really hate math, but it was more utilitarian. He wanted something where he could understand people, not understand computers. So then he got into environmental science, which is a science. But I convinced him he needed to study psychology. He's a good psychologist. So guess what he's studying in psychology?
Cultural psychology.
I'm sorry?
I said cultural psychology.
No. Would that be fun? No, I taught cultural psychology. He's not majoring in anything that I taught. You know, that would fit, but he's in IO. He's in industrial organizational psychology. I know. The least fun of all the well, maybe cognitive's the least fun. I don't know. Research methods is probably the least fun. Or maybe statistics, right? Okay. Well, he's studying IO psychology. Poor kid. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with European Canadians. We do things, what am I talking about? We're not Canadians. Europeans do things just for a good time. They want to feel good, so they do things, but not Asians. As a matter of fact, Asians won't even do things that make them feel good because it makes them feel guilty. Life appears to be less of a pursuit of happiness for people from Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners, and that is something you can take to the bank. The European Americans report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions. They are less depressed than we are. They have less extreme emotions than we do. We as, well, I'm talking about European Americans, aren't I? Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia. So since their emotions are less extreme, they have less depression. So they are the least likely to commit suicide. I know, of all the Americans, Asians are the least likely to commit suicide. And who's number one? I'm sorry? No, you're whispering. Who's number one? Who's number one? Who's number one?
Native Americans.
Native Americans, number one. Who's number two? Who's number two? Who's number two?
Other Native Americans.
Other Native Americans. Wait a minute.
The Canadians.
Oh, we don't care if Canadians kill themselves. That's another country. So number one's Native Americans, and right behind them, right behind them, like tenths of percentage. Anglos, yeah. It's us. White guys, yeah. So you guys are number one, we're number two. This is a real sad classroom, because you guys are number one, and my guys are number two.
Maybe your guys are number one, but we're number two. Because there's a lot more of you guys.
That's true, there's a lot more of us than there are of you.
Population, that's a population.
But by percentage, you guys are. Yours is, by percentage, yours is higher. But a lot more white people kill themselves. But there's a lot more white people.
We get a lot of Native Americans, they go unreported though.
Potentially, yeah, that's a problem. Anytime we're dealing with Catholics, they don't like to admit that somebody killed themselves. That's a problem. Yeah, a lot of suicides that go unreported. And almost all the reservations up north are Catholic. Now let's talk more about suicide. Oh boy, let's go. Okay. So the question is, did the Russians really interfere with our election? And the answer is, it seems like it. But now we're going to find out, are the Russians just like us? Are they just like Americans? Should we trust Putin? If he tells us something, should we take it to the bank, just like we're going to take everything that Trump tells us to the bank? I think some people take everything that Trump tells them to the bank. So the question is, are the Russians like us? Like Americans? And the answer is no. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than Americans. So they are brooders. They brood. They sit in the corner and think about it. They sit in the corner and drink tea or vodka or something. They have a lot more alcoholics in their country than we do in the United States. So they're different than we are. They're brooders. We try to be happy. They try to brood. Does anybody know what a brooder house is? Brooder house? No, actually it's a German word for where you raise your chickens, is in a brooder house. So it's where the roosters and the hens get together. It's a brooder house. Brooder, of course, means brother. Reflective Americans were more prone to depression, but Russian brooders tended to have less depression than we do. So they think about it more. They think about being unhappy more, but they're not as unhappy as we are. So they have less depression than we do. But they brood. So if something bad happens to them, they think about it, and they think about it, and they think about it, and they think about it. Who won the Cold War? Who won the Cold War? Have you seen people with hats on that said, Cold War, and then they've got all kinds of stuff on? I was in the Cold War. We were in Germany, and the Russian tanks were on the East German border. I mean, there were thousands of them. It looked like they were about to invade. That's the Cold War. This is in 1980. What happened in 1980? Oh, the Russians invaded Afghanistan. Then they got their butts kicked. You saw it. It was in Red Dawn. No, wait a minute. Red Dawn was all about the United States, wasn't it? Okay. So they brood. Who won the Cold War? Did we win it, or did the Russians win it? Did the Soviets win it? They weren't Russians back then. They were Soviets. Who won? Us or them? We did. We won. The wall came down, so they lost all of those Eastern European countries. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, they all went, they're not communist anymore. So the Russians lost. Now remember, when something bad happens to a Russian, he sits and he thinks about it. We as Americans, we try to make ourselves feel better. We do happy things. He drinks and sits and thinks about it. He's a brooder. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead to Russian feelings of depression as it does in the United States. If we had lost the Cold War, we would probably be very depressed about it. But the Russians weren't depressed about it. They did something about it. They just indicted 7 more Russians for hacking into the U.S. Election system. 7 more. 7 more for this election. This doesn't have to do with the last election. They've already indicted, 28 Russians from the last election? So the Russians do something about it. They brood, they think about it, they have the same emotions we do, but they don't react in the same way. Tsai, Knudsen, and Fung in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal effect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood that they will experience these emotions. So if something makes you happy, if it makes you happy to go out to a bar, you're going to go out to a bar just to have those emotions again, trying to find those emotions, if that makes you feel good. This is one of the arguments about marijuana in the United States. They just legalized it in Canada, and people are starting to talk about legalizing it in the United States. Why? Well, some people use it, and when they use it, it makes them feel mellow, makes them feel better. So they think that's going to be a positive thing. That's an ideal effect. So what do you have to do to feel good? Whatever it is, you're going to do it over and over again. For most Americans, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for most East Asians, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal, which is the difference between us and them. Us and them. When we, if we want to feel good, we'll do something that makes us excited, like going to a basketball game. Boy, that's exciting, or a baseball game, or someplace where we can get excited. We want to be aroused, not that kind of arousal. We want to feel strong emotions. So we go to basketball games, or we go to football games, or we watch football on television and then scream at the screen. I haven't watched football in a long time. But in Asia, they don't do that. They're looking for positive emotions, but with low arousal. Okay. Sai, Louis, Chin, and Uchida in 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had bigger smiles than the storybooks in the children's storybooks in Taiwan. So in Taiwan, if you read their storybooks, they all have pretty much the same face, and they don't smile nearly as much as we do in the United States. But remember, we already talked about the Chinese or the Taiwanese storybooks. In Taiwan, they're always trying to make a point. In the United States, we just want our kids to win. But in China, they want to teach them something. In Taiwan, used to be Nationalist China, but we've changed the name. As interesting as all of that is. So they're looking for low arousal, and we're looking for high arousal. So when we write a storybook, we're not going to write a storybook about somebody doing their homework. How boring is that? And who would read it? No, we're writing a storybook about monsters. And one monster right after the other. And where the monsters grow or something, whatever that book is. It was on television last night. Anyway. You've read these books, I'm sure, to your kids. Dr. Seuss. The Cat in the Hat. My goodness gracious, that damn cat, it just keeps doing really bad stuff. And those kids keep getting in trouble, and the mother's dress gets all splashed with pink spots, and all kinds of horrible stuff happens. And mom's walking down the sidewalk. She's almost to the house. What happens next? The cat puts everything away, but he does it really, really, really fast. That's an American book. Wow, everybody's, oh, and the little girl's saying, no more stuff. And the little boys say, yeah, let's do more fun stuff. And of course the fish is telling them, yeah, the fish is telling them, stop. This is crazy stuff. That's an American storybook, right? You've never read Cat in the Hat? Oh my God. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. How about green eggs and ham, Sam I Am? Sam I Am's trying to get this guy to eat green eggs and ham, and he wants him to eat it in a train. He wants him to eat it in the rain. Exciting stuff. Not in China, of course. I know. I'll bring you green eggs and ham next. It's an exciting book. It's exciting right to the end. And then the guy eats the stuff. Guess what happens next? He eats the stuff and he says, I'll eat it anywhere. I'll eat it in a train, I'll eat it in the rain, I'll eat it with a fork, I'll eat it with a spork. I don't know. I don't remember. It's an exciting book. Okay, I'll see you guys next week. You've read Green Eggs and Ham. It's my grandson's favorite book. He knows all the words, and he can't even read yet. You've read
As
reading.
long as it's cited correctly.
You've never read
What are you gonna do yours?
Oh my God.
This is what I was
Yeah. I'm going to my office.
Oh, okay, oh, it is.
Okay.
Brian, I don't know if you're free right
Yeah,
now. Okay,
I guess.
just having meet you at the 6 Flags?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
How far is it from here to place?
Where is he?
He's in the library right now.
Is he going to school this year, this
No,
semester?
he graduated.
I know he graduated,
Yeah.
but I mean, he can go to graduate school.
Yeah.
Something else can happen, right?
Why?
Wait a minute, what am I doing? Oh, I'm going home.
It's probably 15 minutes?
I'm in room 106 now instead of 105.
Okay.
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 That's Christine's old office.
On me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's in my office and I'm in her office.
Oh, that's why I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's not here today.
What?
Is she? Does she have class today?
I have class with her.
Oh, really? Oh, I haven't
Yeah.
seen her. Oh, maybe she is here.
Don't do that, you kind of.
She's pregnant.
He gave me
I know.
a key, I'm so
So
disappointed.
she stays home a lot.
On your overall grade,
Yes,
you gave me a B.
maybe he's just giving out these.
What other books do you have on other countries?
I know.
What, you don't like Germans?
I aced all my
I
exams.
can't really get anything from that book.
The Germans are nuts. Those are the craziest people in the world. Aren't they?
Oh. Look at that.
See ya. So who else do you want? There's gotta be somebody you're interested in.
I don't know. What was the other?
I have Japan. I don't know what I have left.
Anybody doing anything on Japan?
Somebody's doing Japan, but I've got a lot of really good books about Japan, Japanese. They're different. They're not the same at all. You guys walked in like you're about to go out and have a fight with each other.
Those green eggs and ham.
Makes you emotional, doesn't it? Don't eat the green eggs and ham. Anything that is green, that is protein, means it's rotten. Right? Yeah, so don't eat them, okay. At least we're in agreement there.
Anything on like any Middle, like the Middle Eastern?
They eat rotten food,
Region.
okay? They think it gives it flavor. The Brits, yeah, we'll see, Edison. The Brits eat rotten birds. Fowl? Oh, God.
Birds.
Yeah.
What's that stuff that they use in Asia, I believe? They,
Nook Mom?
It's like those eggs with.
Yeah. I know. And they eat them. Oh, my God, it's been sitting there for 2,000 years and you're going to eat that egg? Thank you. Ugh.
My daughter doesn't even like eggs.
Try them eggs.
Well, some people are allergic to eggs, and if they're allergic to eggs, a lot of times it means that, we'll see, it means that